So, yeah, I'm very happy to be presenting to you all this evening. Geodiversity, the greatest story of our time. Yes, I believe it is. Geology is a science that provides understanding of how the Earth and indeed life has evolved through time. So by fully appreciating our geodiversity, we will be better able to work with our environment and what it can offer us in the future. So tonight I'm going to talk about how the Earth works. So a little bit of an introduction to plate tectonics. We'll then tackle the question, why is Northern Ireland so geologically diverse? And then we'll also tackle the often tricky one, which is how old are our rocks? And I'll introduce the geological timescale. To the left here, you can see an example of a geological timescale. It's nothing to be scared of. It gives the age in millions of years, starting with the oldest at the bottom and the youngest at the top. I'll introduce you to these various geological time periods. These are just names for chunks of time, just to help us classify the rocks. And in this time scale, I'm showing examples of ancient life that existed at different periods in Earth history. So there's a nice woolly mammoth in the Quaternary, our familiar dinosaurs of the Jurassic and the Cretaceous. And what I plan to do is take you on a journey, really, travel back through time and imagine the environments and places that together constitute Northern Ireland's geodiversity. So how does the Earth work? Plate tectonics. Okay. Well, the Earth's crust is made up of many plates that move relative to each other through time. It's as simple as that. And if we look at this map of the world on the right of the screen here, we can see there's the UK and Ireland in there, and it's part of this Eurasian plate. There's the North American plate. And these black lines are boundaries between the plates. And crust can be made along oceanic ridges or spreading centers. So here's an example of an oceanic ridge where ocean crust is being made, stretching from Iceland right down towards the Antarctic plate. And at either side of that ridge, the Atlantic Ocean is being formed. So it's spreading along this line. Crust can also be destroyed, and that can happen along subduction zones. So here's an example of a plate boundary between the Pacific plate and the North American plate, and that Pacific oceanic plate is being pushed underneath the North American plate. Now, in most cases, the rates of movement are very slow. So we're talking centimeters per year, you know, the kind of rates which your fingernails grow. And that's particularly the case with spreading ridges where oceans are forming. But some movements can be really very quick, meters per second. Such movements can happen in fault zones, such as the San Andreas Fault here on the western seaboard of America. And they can result in really very devastating earthquakes, as history has shown us. So I mentioned continental crust and ocean crust. Continental crust, here's again, this is this North American plate. It's compared to the ocean crust, it's relatively light. So here's the ocean crust of the Pacific being formed along this mid-oceanic ridge here. And it's moving off in this direction, and it comes into contact with this North American plate through time and is then pushed underneath because it's relatively heavy. So why is Northern Ireland so geology diverse? Well, it's kind of difficult to see, but we are positioned pretty close to the edge of an ancient continent called Laurentia. And the various blocks of color you see on this map here represent different blocks of basement rocks, the really old underlying foundations of our respective countries. And these rocks, they contain the information that geologists can read that allow us to build up a geological history. And Northern Ireland continental crust has seen oceans come and go, and in between time, the development of mountain belts, which have also risen up and been eroded away. Remarkable. So change happens at continental margins, and as a result, Northern Ireland is home to rocks that record nearly 600 million years of Earth history. This is the Iapta Suture here, and it runs through Ireland down in this direction. And it marks the junction between continents, the Laurentian continent and Avallonian continent that collided some 430 million years ago and resulted in the formation of a mountain belt that stretches from the Appalachian Mountains right through this part of the world and into Scandinavia. So let's have a look at a geological map. And here's a map of the UK and Ireland. Lots of wonderful colours. The colours represent different ages of rock. So here's these geological time periods again. The Cambrian. Some people may have heard of the Precambrian. There's our Jurassic again in there. And in terms of the age of the rocks, they from the north here, and as you travel sort of southwards through the UK and towards London, the rocks get progressively younger. So you get that full suite of geology from Scotland right through England and Wales and back into England. If we focus in a little bit on Northern Ireland, and this is a simplified geological map of Northern Ireland, geology is not that complicated, really. Again, colour just represents either different ages of rocks or different rock types. And in this case, we've gone with colour representing age of rocks. So our oldest rocks are sitting here in the northwest, in the Sperrin Mountains. These are Precambrian rocks. They're also up here in northeast County Antrim. Slightly younger rocks of Ordovician and Silurian age. We'll come back to these names of geological time periods again, and hopefully you'll be familiar with a few more of them by the time the presentation's over. So down here we've got Ordovician Silurian rocks in the Longford Down area. Out in the southwest we have Devonian and Carboniferous rocks. And then under much of County Antrim and the surrounding parts of the other counties, we have the youngest rocks in the region, which stretch in age from the Permian through the Triassic, Cretaceous, into the Paleogene, and even into the Oligocene. So a remarkable geological variety in a relatively small area, only 14,000 square kilometers, but we have rocks of every classification. We've got igneous, metamorphic, sedimentary, and nearly every time period from the Neoproterozoic, Precambrian, right up to the Oligocene. So I want to take on this journey through time. It seems kind of nice that the DeLorean car came from Belfast, and we can use it to not go back to the future, but to go back to the Quaternary and the big freeze. Okay, so this is the first part of our journey. Here's our friend, the woolly mammoth, sitting here in the Quaternary. So we're talking about a geological time period that commenced, I say only, kind of silly thing that a geologist would say, but only 2.6 million years ago. And during that time, what you're seeing actually in the picture here is a lovely shot of a glacier in Iceland with its various crevassing, and you can see the way it's flowing downhill. And there's a glacial lake forming at the front of it where it's melting. So in this part of the world, the North Atlantic has seen around 20 ice ages during the Quaternary time period. Some people kind of find that, hard to believe. I think there's only been one, but no, there's been 20 of them. And in between each ice age, we have a warm period. It's also known as an interglacial. And we're in an interglacial right now. The last ice age retreated from this part of the world maybe 10,000 years ago. So I'm going to be showing you some of these paleo globe or global reconstructions to show you where the land is and where the oceans are. You'll also see some annotation showing you where mountain belts are and such like. But this one here is just to show you the extent of the North Pole ice in a interglacial where we are now. But if you go into a glacial, that ice extends out much further south. And you can see here that the ice cap at 18,000 years before present was far enough south that it covered much of the UK and Ireland. Here's some nice reconstructions from a book by McCabe and Dunlop that shows the extent of ice 22,000 years ago, and these parts of southern Ireland uncovered, and southern England as well. So ice forming in high ground of Scotland and Northern Ireland and Ireland, and flowing southwards through the Irish Sea and over the land masses as well. By 19,000 years before present, that ice was waning. It was on the retreat, and you can see here that parts of the Irish Sea are starting to reappear. And by 17,000 years ago, things are melting back pretty quickly, and parts of Strangford Lough are now visible. The Isle of Man, not quite visible, but there it is now at 13,000 years ago. And by 10,000 years ago, there was virtually nothing left. So imagine that repeated 20 times in the last 2.6 million years. The erosive power, the changes in climate, it's just incredible, really. And this is the kind of landscape that repeated glaciations and melting of all of that ice. This is the kind of landscape that can be formed. And what we're looking at here is a digital terrain model of pretty much a good chunk of County Down and County Armagh as well. So here we can see this is the Mourne Mountains in here. And this is Slieve Gullion and the Ring of Gullion in here. And here is Carlingford Down in here. Newry is sitting in here. Belfast is way off up to the northeast there. But here's another interesting feature. There's a channel that is cutting through the landscape. This is controlled by a fault, a break in the crust about which the rocks have moved. And faults provide weaknesses in rock that can be exploited by meltwater, by water that's under extreme pressure under ice, by the ice itself, by material that's being carried by the ice and the meltwater. So this is an erosive channel that's been cut into the bedrock as a consequence of multiple glaciations and interglacials. If you look around on the landscape in this region here, you can see there are various ridges in here, and then there's lots of little kind of knobbles. The ridges are, and the knobbles are, subglacial bed forms, features that have formed underneath the ice as it has moved, as it has melted. These ridges are often referred to as ribbed moraines. They form perpendicular to ice movement direction. And these knobbles are actually drumlins, small whale-like hills or whale-back-like hills that form parallel to the direction of ice flow. So we can use what we call the geomorphology, the geodiversity of the morphology of the landscape to read the directions in which the ice was actually moving, which again, amazing. So this is a nice aerial picture of the top end of Strangford Loch, and we can see some really lovely drumlins. That's almost a complete drumlin there. Another one there, another one there. There's some out here in the loch. The drumlins out here in the loch have been drowned as a consequence of sea level rise at the end of the last ice age. And we see things like this. This is the Clockmore Stone above Ross Trevor, and that's Carlingford Loch you can see in the backdrop, which is the end of that glacial meltwater channel that I pointed out on the digital terrain model. This massive boulder of granite, a very famous landmark, is just sitting on top of a very different rock type. You can see this sort of slaty looking rock underneath. This is known as an erratic. It's a stone that has been, or a boulder that has been carried here by ice and left behind whenever that ice has disappeared. So it tells a story, or it helps to tell a story. And I'm going to read a few poems through my presentation, my own contributions, but many poets have found inspiration from the landscape, as Kirsten pointed out, including, of course, Seamus Heaney, who wrote so many wonderful pieces such as Ban Clay and Sandstone Keepsake. Such poems use landscape features or objects to give meaning to everyday activities, relationships, and indeed ways of life that are, in part at least, shaped by geodiversity. So this one's called Killard Point. Before Vikings, St. Patrick, and the early settlers, at Killard Point, an ice age founded. On a coast once again revealed, its flesh stripped, ribs striated. A landscape scoured by forces hard to fathom. Some speak of kilometers, others miles of ice that passed over these rock surfaces, with cargo of boulders, cobbles, and pebbles, swept from Scotland and the Ailsa Craig, erratics that rest where farmers steer the plough, where whooper swans and brent geese gaze, stranded on storm beaches, where painted ladies bask in warm autumnal sun. Right, let's go back to the Paleogene and the opening of the North Atlantic. So here's the Paleogene. There's our friend the dinosaur. We'll get to him or her. The Paleogene sitting between 66 and 23 million years ago. And it was around about this time here that the North Atlantic started to opening. And the image that you're seeing here on the right is a present day image of the the sea, but the ocean floor of the North Atlantic. And what you can see here is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So this is the spreading center about which ocean crust is being formed. So magma is coming up a crack or many cracks and is creating crust along that line and forming the ocean floor of the North Atlantic. If we have a look at what was going on around about 65 million years ago, this map here shows things a little clearer. You can see the UK and Ireland are a good deal closer to Greenland and Newfoundland. So the North Atlantic really hasn't started to open properly yet. It's had a go over here and failed, and then it's really started to get going along this line here. And the volcanic activity that this caused led to the development of the rocks that we see in County Antrim, forming the cap to the Antrim Plateau. We call these the Antrim lava group, or just the Antrim basalts. It also formed the Mourne Mountains, the granites of the Mourne Mountains. It formed the granites of Slieve Gullion and Carlingford as well. And then if we look a little further afield in the UK, we can see that it's been responsible for forming various granites and lava fields in Arran, Mull, Skye, Rum, the various Scottish islands. And this is what the landscape of County Antrim would have looked like 65 million years ago. There would have been fissures opening up with volcanoes forming on the surface, lava pouring out and creating lava flows, covering over the pre-existing chalk landscape, emitting large volumes of gas into the atmosphere, which would have been changing the climate. But quite an inhospitable place, really. It's a different picture now, of course. This is the very iconic Giant's Causeway. And just looking at it, you know, it's easy to understand why our ancestors are you know, they came up with stories to explain how these different rock formations actually came about, because they had no idea about plate tectonics and even volcanology. So, you know, having an Irish giant, Finn McCool, battling the Scottish giant Benandonna was a great way of accounting for such strange natural or maybe not natural phenomena. This is also in County Antrim. It's in the area of the Antrim Plateau itself. This is Slemish Mountain here, and this is a volcanic plug that is has punched up through the Antrim basalts, through the lava flows. So if you kind of imagine that the landscape here is around the plug is a series of layers of basalt, then this forms a plug that goes down and through those layers, perhaps for kilometers. And this pipe would have been feeding magma from a chamber at many kilometers depth up through all those pre-existing layers of lava and up to the surface where it may have been feeding further lava flows on the landscape. Here's the very recognizable profile of the Mourne Mountains in County Down. And these are granite plutons. So essentially fossilized magma chambers, really, places that when it was much deeper in the subsurface, where magma would have gathered in preparation for its ascent to the surface, where it may have formed volcanoes. So these are now preserved as granite. And I'm going to take you now back again. We're going back to the Jurassic. So we're traveling back to the time of the dinosaurs and ammonites and such like, the Jurassic, between 201 and 145 million years ago. Now we're going to start to look at some of these paleo globes, these reconstructions of where the various continents would have been positioned at the time. So we're going back, 200 million years, and we can see that the UK and Ireland are sitting in an ocean, Tethys Ocean, and we're a good deal further south than where we were during the Paleogene. So things are warming up in the seas as well, and our warm seas were home to various marine reptiles. Because it was a sea, obviously we have very little record of dinosaurs recorded in our rocks, but we have the Jurassic sea life preserved. And this reconstruction here is showing us what an ichthyosaur would have looked like. You can see its bones through the skin and the muscle. A dolphin-like creature with big eyes, pretty sharp teeth, very quick in the water, pretty fearsome predator. And we are turning up pieces of ichthyosaur from our Jurassic rocks in Northern Ireland. This, courtesy of Mike Sims at the Ulster Museum, is a piece of the Minis monster, as it's been termed. And this is part of the head of that ichthyosaur. We can see where the eye would have been. We've not got the full snout, but the bit that we've got, you can see there's some pretty sharp teeth in there. There's a couple of vertebrae in there as well. Superb fossil, all part of our geodiversity. This is an image of a rock surface from a place called Ramore Head in Portrush in North County Antrim. And what you can see on this rock surface are the impressions of many ammonites. Incredible number. Now, if we go back a couple of centuries, there was a battle raging between scientists, between Neptunists and Plutonists. And the Neptunists believed that all rocks were precipitated from seawater, and the Plutonists were coming up with some crazy ideas that some rocks may have formed actually, by from volcanoes and from cooling and crystallization of magma in pockets underground. So the Neptunists discovered this location, and they believed that the ammonites here were actually preserved in basalt, which is an igneous rock type. And yeah, they were pretty happy with themselves. But a Plutonist called Playfair, fair play to him, actually identified this rock type as being not basalt, but a baked sediment. What had happened is that magma had entered pre-existing layers of Jurassic rocks containing ammonites, and the heat from that magma had transferred into the surrounding sediment and literally baked it till it was flint-like, and for all the world looks like basalt. The name for this rock is Hornfels, which I think is a great name. So I think a really important part of, well, everything really is a really important part of learning is discovery, and to have such rich geodiversity lets us do this. And it's no different to having biodiversity to discover, learn, and to take pleasure from. This little poem's called Ammonite, and it's about discovery. So, Ammonite. Split the rock, right of line, owl eyes draw in to mine, sight that has not seen since serpents swam in oceans green, and terrible lizards walked the rain-drenched forests. Split the rock, right of line, owl eyes drawn into mine. Right, we're going to head back again. Hope no one's getting any sort of journey sickness, but we're heading back to the Triassic. So we're going back as far as 250 million years. You can see the Triassic there stretching between 250 and 200. Look where we are now. We've got what we're terming a megacontinent, the continent of Pangaea. And there's the UK and Ireland. Again, sitting at the edge of a continent and pretty close to the equator, south of 30 degrees north, pretty much where the Sahara Desert is now. So what was the climate like then? Well, it was like this pretty much. Now, this is actually the Colorado dune field, but the Triassic Northern Ireland landscape would have had desert dunes, or aeolian dunes as we call them. There would have been river systems, albeit periodic. Whenever there was rainfall, those river systems would have been doing their thing. We wouldn't have had much in the way of vegetation at that time. There are a few spores preserved in the fossil record, but not an awful lot. So much of this sand and any soils that were forming were pretty, loose and open to erosion. And whenever those sands and sediments move about and get deposited, eventually they form rock. And this is Scrabo Quarry. We can see Scrabo Tower on top, and this is the town of Newtonards in the background here. So this is in County Down. And in this quarry, we have some sandstones that were deposited during the Triassic in these desert-like environments. And in this quarry face, there's maybe 50 meters of sandstone preserved. And that's probably about a tenth of the thickest Sherwood sandstone sequence that we have in Northern Ireland, around and under the Antrim Plateau. So we can have up to 0.5 kilometer of thickness of these sandstones. If we zoom in a wee bit on a quarry face here, we can see some of the bedding, sort of sub-horizontal layers that we call bedding. But then between the bedding surfaces, we're seeing what we call sedimentary structures. And as geologists, we can read these structures and we can tell what sort of environments were active at the time of deposition of the sand that makes up most of this rock. So we can see some what we call cross stratification that tells us that this particular bed was forming in a river. If we move up the sequence a little bit, this package of rock here is a little bit different because it's got tongues of coarser sand interleaving with finer stuff towards the bottom. These were avalanches down the face of a desert dune. So this was formed in a dune setting, this was formed in a river setting, and the two are occurring pretty much together. So that's what we're seeing in the rock record. And that rock, you know, it's there to be seen in a quarry, which is just a most amazing place for geologists and anybody who's interested in rocks to go and look at them. But it's been a source of building stone for well, I won't say hundreds of years, but certainly tens of years. I'm not sure that quarry was active at the time of the building of Grey Abbey, and this is what you're seeing, one of the entrances to here in the village of Grey Abbey. It's just one of many buildings that through the centuries have made use of Scrabo stone. Here is geodiversity influencing architecture. Let's go back to the Upper Carboniferous, swamps and deltas. So we're going right back to 350 to 300 million years. We've got things like tree ferns and corals here as examples of ancient life at the time. Let's look at that paleoglobe. There's the equator. We're sitting pretty much at the edge of a continent again. And yeah, pretty much on the equator. So things are going to be pretty hot. And if we look at what's going on in the Upper Carboniferous, this is the kind of thing we might have expected to see. We have deltas being fed by rivers that are draining from the continent into the surrounding seas. Not unlike the Nile Delta or the Mississippi Delta. So there's one of our river systems in the back there. We've got a swampy area in between the river systems in the delta. And here's some of the ancient life. So we have various types of tree fern and other plants. We have early amphibians on the scene and things like giant dragonflies. If we go to Ballycastle, North County Antrim, we have rock sequences preserved from this Upper Carboniferous time period, and we can see the layers of sandstone through here that were deposited in river channels. And then we can see some darker rock types in between the sandstones. Here, mudstones, and the blackest ones are actually coals. And coal mining is partly responsible for making Ballycastle what it is today, with its rich industrial heritage. And at this point, I want to give a quick plug to our new Lurgan Geology and Built Heritage Trail. Pamphlet will be launched next month at the Northern Ireland Science Festival. Here we see some Scottish sandstone from near Glasgow, the Binney sandstone, influencing local County Armagh built heritage. Let's go back further in time again. So we're getting towards the lower Carboniferous. We've got tropical seas again in the area of Northern Ireland in this lower Carboniferous. So the sea has invaded a little bit into here. And the environments that the rocks tell us existed look like this. It's an artist's impression, but it's based on fossil evidence and through reading the sedimentary structures in the rocks. So we have reefs forming, various shelled creatures, some that kind of look familiar, others that are less familiar. There are fish and sharks, various corals, and we see these nautiloid-like gonia-types with squid-like creatures patrolling the seas. like the sharks and the fish, they were predators. And we see a lot of evidence for sea lilies or crinoids. And this is the landscape of the Burren in West Ireland. And the bedrock here is the landscape pretty much. It's just amazing. We can see the bedding of the individual layers of limestone, and the interaction of rainwater with those layers of limestone have led to the development of this limestone pavement, dissolution of the limestone, washing it away, and creation of all of these little microenvironments with various ferns and other quite rare plants living in there. So this geodiversity being the basis for the biodiversity. Just popping back to Lurgan, and here we see use of locally sourced basalt and Armagh limestone that together make up St. Peter's Parish Church. Again, geodiversity controlling our built environment. A couple of pictures here, one showing the basalt with its fossilized gas bubbles, or vesicles as we call them. And here's a picture of the limestone with a fossil coral trapped over around about 350 million years old coral. The gas bubbles maybe 60 million years old. We're going back again. We're going back to the Ordovician and the Silurian, and just want to talk a little bit now to finish things up about how oceans come and oceans go. Here's the Ordovician Silurian down here on the time scale. So we're nearly 500 million years old at the bottom of the Ordovician, and at the top of the Silurian, 420 million years old. And the paleoglobes here that I'm showing you a sequence of, I had to split the diagram. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, but they show the development of the movement of these various continental, of our various continents through time. So around about 480 million years ago, there was Laurentia with Scotland and the north of Ireland quite separate from the southern half of Ireland and the rest of the UK on a separate continent called Avalonia. And we have this broad Iapetus Ocean between. It's an ocean on the scale of the Atlantic. It's not a small ocean. And then as we move through geological time, 460, you can see that ocean starting to close, and our respective halves of our countries are getting closer together. By 440 or so, things are starting to assemble. And by the time we get to around about 420 million years ago, we've assembled a new large continent, and we've brought the north and the south together, which is always good to see. And this is what was going on at the margin of the Laurentian continent. This light continental crust was being underwritten by a subducting oceanic plate belonging to the Iapetus Ocean. And as that oceanic plate was being pushed down and back into the earth under the Laurentian continent, slithers of sediment that were being deposited in the Iapetus Ocean, mudstones and sandstones, were being scraped off at that leading edge and incorporated into a big wedge of sediments known as an accretionary prism. Just going to touch on mountain building. That process of subduction and closure of the ocean can't go on forever. So eventually we're going to end up with a situation where we collide continents together, and we form a mountain chain, or an orogenic belt, as we call it. Here's an example where India moving moving north towards the Eurasian plate, eventually collides into its present-day position and forms the Himalaya Mountains. There's Everest as shows what can happen when continents collide. And that's exactly what was going on along a line stretching through Newfoundland, through the UK and Ireland, off into Scandinavia. That was happening, well, for quite a long time, actually, from maybe 480 million years ago right through to maybe 420, forming the Appalachian Caledonide orogenic belt is what we call it. A mountain chain, but showing us how oceans close, continents collide, and mountains form. And when continents collide, rocks get deformed, and they change. These are grey-wacky sandstones and siltstones in County Down on the Ards Peninsula. And all the layers that you see in here were originally horizontal layers of sand on an ocean floor. They are now all, well, pretty much vertical. In some places they're turned upside down and they've been folded. So these rocks are telling us that deformation has taken place, that they've been involved in something pretty serious, and it has been one of these continental collisions that has led to the folding, and indeed the changes in metamorphism of these rocks. So these rocks show evidence of being heated up and put under a lot of pressure, which has actually changed their mineralogy. And we see minerals in them that tell us just how much heat and pressure the rocks have experienced. So we're pretty much done. I'm just going to take you back to the Precambrian to kind of finish off the story. This is when Iapetus, that ocean, this is when it opens. So we're talking about more than 600 million years ago. And look where the north of Ireland and Northern Ireland and Scotland are positioned, pretty much where the South Pole is. So it's been a pretty epic journey. And Iapetus, father of Atlantis, is starting to form as a large continent breaks apart, forming Laurentia, forming Gondwana, just through the truly awesome power of the Earth. Here at Tor Head in northeast County Antrim, we have rocks that have been deposited in that Iapetus Ocean at around about 600 million years ago. You include limestones that are exposed just through here. So if you park over here and then take a little trundle around the side of the hillside here, you'll see some lovely blue rocks exposed in the cliff, and they are metamorphosed limestones, and they're actually upside down, and they're part of a massive fold that was formed as continents collided and caused deformation of all of the rocks that were present around at that time. So to kind of sum things up, I'm going to try and do it in a poem. It's called Revelations, and it's called that because, to me, discovering all these bits of geology, and they are revelations. It's amazing. So 10,000 years ago, great glaciers melted. 2,000 years of grinding. Bare bones of mountains, mammoth and giant elk, testament to an age of ice. 60 million years ago, walls of broken rock burned all asunder. Cave hill fissures spewed molten rock, blackened a steaming moonscape cut by rivers glowing. 450 million years ago, Ireland was split from Dundalk to Ballybunion by an ocean. Iapetus, now swallowed, tears remain, source of the Lagan. So to conclude, I just want to re-emphasize, by fully appreciating and protecting our geodiversity, we will better understand our whole environment and what it can offer us in the future. Thank you very much.